Now that we've had an introduction to this game itself, I want to talk a little bit more about how this project itself is going to work. I'm going to be splitting up the videos for this particular project into two very different styles. The first being the more action-based styles, which focus on stage progression and showing off the actual gameplay aspects of the game. And the second portion is going to be the more informative and mechanics-based discussions of the game, going into details about all the little things that you don't normally see. This split, as well as having the thumbnails to represent them, should make it easier for people to view what they actually want to see. That way, if somebody doesn't want to listen to the longer discussions about mechanics, they don't have to, and can just focus on the stage-based videos. Now, the first mechanics-based thing I want to talk about is character creation. In Phantasy Star Online, for the GameCube as well as Blue Burst, there were 12 different classes to choose from, which are being shown here now. Amongst these 12 classes, there's 3 main types: the Hunters, the Rangers, and the Forces, which are melee-based, ranged-based, and magic-based, respectively. Amongst the 12 classes, there's also 3 different races you can choose from: the Humans, the Newmans, and the Casts, all of which have their own advantages and disadvantages that I'll be discussing later. Now, aside from having all these different classes to choose from, Phantasy Star Online also gave a lot more character customization options than other online games at the time. Before, you'd be lucky if you got much more than face and general size options, but you get a lot more to work with this time around. Sega really kind of set the bar for character customization with this game, considering you can even go so far as adjusting your character's proportions to a degree, as well as, a lot of different color options, and just a lot of things that you didn't see at the time. And with their newer Phantasy Star games, the bar continues to remain high, and they're really trying to just have this nice standard that you should be able to really customize your characters to what you want it to look like, honestly. That said, there's still a lot more to your character customization in this game than just the class you choose and the looks of your character itself. It actually decides a lot, even so much as the name of your character, which is what I'm going to be getting into right now. While the character select screen is going to look a bit different between the GameCube version and the Blue Burst version, they both work pretty much the same way. Select your slot and create your character. Once you've reached the class selection screen, you'll be given this screen, through which you can mull over and decide which particular one you want to play. Although, if you're making your first character, deciding between a Hunter, a Ranger, and a Force becomes slightly easier, as you probably don't want to start with a Force, as they are very weak and money reliant at the start of the game. It's better giving them a few items from characters you've made previously to give them an easier start. Now, while it does say that the Hunters are the beginner class and the Rangers are mid-level, I honestly feel that the Rangers are an easier class to start with than Hunters, just because they're a safer style of gameplay. But first, I'm going to look over creating a Hugh Castillo, which are the most accurate of the Hunters, which is actually something very important. Once you've chosen your type and class, you get to come to the character creation screen, where you can customize your appearance to your heart's content. Now, casts are a little more limited than non-casts. They don't get access to such options as the face option, shown here, as well as the hair option and the skin tone option that non-casts do. Once you've decided on a few things, such as your character's head and their costume color, you can move on to what's probably one of the more unique features to character customization in Phantasy Star games, the proportions adjustment. Honestly, this was quite powerful for the technology of the time, and really all I ever seen at this time, other than this, was just static sizes, such as just small, medium, or large of whatever character you wanted. But with this, you can get pretty detailed. It wasn't the best, but it was the start of a technology that Sega's been improving every single time they release a new Phantasy Star game. Once you've made all of your decisions based on appearance, you get to move on to naming your character, which actually holds a lot more importance than one would originally think from this particular screen. Your character's name is 100% on what decides on your section ID. Well, what's the section ID? It's this stupid little thing. This thing right here. This thing decides more than it really ever should. But it was the start of the mechanic that I could at least understand the thought behind. The 10 section IDs, Viridia, Greenel, Skyly, Blueful, Purplenum, Pinkle, Redria, Oran, Yellowbows, and Whittle, all help decide the type of drops that your character can actually find. This is all centered around how rare drops work in this game, where every enemy type will have exactly one rare drop in which they can give to you. What a section ID is more of a label to actually tell you which drop table you're going to be getting with your character. Of course, nothing in-game actually tells you this, so you have to look up drop tables online. While this really only starts mattering in very hard and ultimate difficulties, this is still the majority of your character's lifespan, so you should try to think about which ID actually suits your needs the most. When playing as a hunter, I'd recommend either Skyly, Oran, or Whittle. All have a good selection of drops that hunters can use, and they actually have pretty good drops overall for other purposes too. Of course, my recommendation will change based on whether or not you're playing the GameCube version or the Blue Burst version. On the GameCube version, you're better off just sticking with Skyly. For Rangers, I feel Purple Dome is probably the best ID, but Greenill's also alright, and Verdi is good in some cases as well. Purple Dome has by far the biggest selection of Ranger weapons, so if you're looking for just a catch-all type of ID for that, go with that one. Viridia has a few niche drops on Blue Burst that are really useful, however. On the GameCube version, Purple Dome's pretty much the only way to go. Greenill's okay, but there's really no other good IDs for the Rangers. Then comes the issue of forces. Yeah, forces don't really have any good drops to go for specifically. Unless you're on Blue Burst, then you can get most of them by just going with Redria, which is also one of the best general IDs in the game, so it's a pretty good one to have. Since a lot of force drops appear on multiple IDs, it's not a bad idea to just go ahead and use the forces for whatever IDs that you can help support your other characters with. Although if playing on Blue Burst, you'll want at least one ID that can get to what's called the V801, which is an essential slot item for forces. After all that comes the issue with the remaining 3 IDs that I didn't mention: Blueful, Pinkle, and Yellowbows. Yellowbows is an okay ID. It's pretty much the most average ID you'll be able to get in the game. It has a few drops for every type of character, but it doesn't have anything substantial on its own. Its main specialty is that it has the most drops for enemy part type weapons. Now, Blueful and Pinkle, they're both pretty much terrible IDs. They barely have anything useful at all, even on Blue Burst. So they're kind of the IDs you avoid unless you need them for a very niche drop. Now, as I said before, Section ID is entirely based on your character's name. So it becomes a case of, do you really want to have to keep remaking that character with the same appearance setup just to try and get the right ID? Well, no, of course not. That's extremely tedious. So there's one place you can go to make it a lot easier. The website PSO World actually has a Section ID calculator for both Blue Burst and GameCube. So you can just keep pumping names into it until you find one that gives you the Section ID that you want. It's still tedious, but it at least saves you from having to recustomize your character every single time. Overall, I'm not a fan of the Section ID system, but it's one of those things where I kind of understand what they were getting at. They wanted to have their one rare drop per enemy type thing, but they wanted to make sure there was actually still a variety in the amount of items in the game. So having these different drop tables based on each Section ID gave them a lot more maximum drops to work with. It also kind of encourages you to try more characters, because if you have more Section IDs, you can fill out those drops that you're missing. If they just let you pick it yourself instead of basing it on your character name, I probably would have had a lot more patience for it. Next, I want to talk about the difference between the 3 different races in this game: the castes, the humans, and the Newmans. Starting off with the castes. Castes actually have a unique in-game ability. When they've taken some damage, they can actually hold still in order to slowly recover some of their health. The rate of regeneration is very slow though, so don't go relying on this unless you need to step away from the game pretty often. Rather than the magic spells everybody else gets to use, castes have to rely on traps. There's 3 different types of traps. First is the fire trap, which just causes a small amount of damage to enemies. These are not very useful at all, except for very low difficulties. Next up is the freeze trap. It's extremely useful, as any enemy caught in its explosion radius will be frozen for a set amount of time. While there are a select few enemies who are immune to freeze, the vast majority are vulnerable to it, so you can use this to really help you survive some tough areas. Finally, there's the Confused Trap, which is the most unique of the three. Any enemy caught in the Confused Trap radius will become confused, which causes them to start attacking whatever is closest to them, whether it's you or an ally. This actually causes the enemies to do quite a bit of damage to themselves, so you can actually just stand back and watch them sometimes. The confusion actually lasts considerably longer than freeze, so if you're up against a particularly troublesome group, try to use these. While no enemies seem to be outright immune to confusion, there are those that behave very, very badly if you confuse them, so you should try and avoid it on those. The next race to talk about is humans, demonstrated by CL here. Now, the thing about humans is they don't actually have any special in-game abilities. Oh, don't be worried about it so much, CL. What humans do get access to is arguably better than the caster Newman traits. They actually get to use 100 more of the stat-increasing materials, which are part of min-maxing your character that I'll talk about in a later video. This allows humans to have much higher level 1 stats if you have the materials ready after you've created the character. Now CL, if that didn't appease your needs, Romarals also get a unique handgun firing animation. Although it does make them look rather silly now, doesn't it? Before talking about Newmans, I'll let Emerald here just demonstrate a little bit of Force gameplay. They have a really rough time at the start, as they have to rely on their magic spells to do any good damage at all, and they really don't have the TP to last very long before having to keep on restoring it. This gets really expensive, as mana fluids actually cost a lot at the very start of the game. If you do insist on starting as a Force as your first character, be prepared to be heading back to the Pioneer 2 pretty often to make use of the cheaper healing, and to have to pick up every tiny little thing that drops in order to actually be able to pay for your mana fluid addiction. The best thing you can do for a new Force is try to raise their mag up to a high level first, mag rising something I'll also talk about in a different video, and try to provide them some money from your other characters. This will allow them to have both the TP and the fluids that they need to actually keep going. Newmans only get one thing as a special racial trait. They actually very slowly regenerate TP while holding still, but the rate is incredibly slow. It's even slower than the HP regeneration from the casts, which really doesn't make any sense, as usually Newmans will end up having more TP than they have HP. Overall, this means Newmans really got the short end of the stick by far. They don't even get the generously high base stats like the casts do to try and make up for the not having the same amount of materials to use as humans, but they get their strength more from their class than their race in this case. The last thing I'd like to talk about in this video is the difference between the 12 game's basic classes itself. I'm just going to quickly go over the strengths and weaknesses of each of the 12 classes in slightly more detail than the game itself gives you, to help you decide on which one you'd actually want to play. First up is the Humar, who has access to a few basic spells, all capping out at level 15. The important ones that you can get, of course, is the healing spell Resta, as well as the debuffs Jilin and Zalur, which will make soloing a bit easier with him than it would with any of the androids, but he still falls short of the Uniwhirl in terms of soloing ability. Overall, in multiplayer, his purpose gets a bit lost, as he just doesn't have the damage output of the Hucast, but he does have a lot more accuracy, so he's a good choice if you want comparable damage, but without having to spend as much time looking for things that boost your accuracy a whole lot. Next up is the Uniwhirl, who has terrible HP and attack power compared to the rest of the hunters, and her accuracy is nearly as bad as the Hucast, but she gets access to all but the most advanced spells in the game, and they cap at level 20. These buffs and debuffs and healing that she has available to her actually make soloing with her extremely easy compared to the rest of the hunters. If you tend to play by yourself a lot, she's a very good pick. Also, she can be a pretty good support when there isn't a Force nearby, so the Uniwhirl has a lot of places where she can be pretty helpful. Oh boy, the Hucast. This sucker has some of the most dangerous damage output you'll ever see, but he has a bit of trouble when fighting on his own, just because he doesn't have the proper healing buffs or debuffs necessary to keep him alive. If you have the one of these on your team with a Force though, my god, the damage output gets out of control. He has the worst accuracy of the hunters, but if you find weapons with what's called hit percentage on them, or you put in a few accuracy slots into his armor, he should be okay. The Hyuga seal ends up being surprisingly unique. She has less attack power than both the Hyucast and the Humar, but she has the most accuracy of all the hunters, so she doesn't have to rely so much on finding hit percent based equipment. Now, she does actually have a lot of unique attacking animations too, which allows her to hit a little bit faster, and even gives her access to actually being able to use daggers, as most characters have an animation that's so bad that they're not worth using. She does have some of the same difficulties with soloing as the Hyucast does, but it's not quite as bad just because she can actually hit her target more often. Overall, she's a really solid choice, and she's definitely the character you'll want to choose if you're sick of missing all the time at higher difficulties with most hunters. Next we step into the Rangers, starting off with the Ramar. He actually has a few basic magic spells as well, much like the Humar, but instead of getting the debuffs Gentleman's Allure, he gets the buffs Shifta and Demand. His spells also cap at level 15. This ends up making his supporting ability marginally better than the Humar, but his MST is even worse, so it's going to take quite a few healing spells before he can top someone off. The Ramar actually sports the highest accuracy in the entire game, which is actually a bit of a big deal. He also has really good attack power for out of the Rangers, and the extra 100 materials from being a human lets him start off with quite a lot of attack power if you have the materials handy to give to him. This extra attack power will help him get over the slightly slow start that Rangers tend to have, so he's a really good pick if you already have other characters handy to give him the materials he needs. The Ramaral is undoubtedly the best soloing class in the entire game. While she does have the lowest attack power of the Rangers, the supports and spells she has are the same as the Uniworld and also cap out at level 20. These actually give her the edge that she needs to be able to take on any enemy that she chooses to. While she's not as useful as a backup support as the Uniworld due to having much lower MST, her buffs and debuffs still help quite a bit, so it's not something to be totally ignored. She's not as useful in multiplayer as she is in soloing, but she's still a very solid class overall. The Rockcast doesn't just sport that tanky design for looks, he actually has the highest HP in the entire game for some reason, and he also has the highest attack power out of all the Rangers, so if you're just looking for a big, bulky thing that hits like a truck, don't look any further than the Rockcast. Ranger droids also have a considerably easier time soloing the game than the Hunter droids do, just because they don't have to get close to the enemy, so it makes a pretty big difference. His attack power difference between the Ramar isn't too huge, but it's enough to make an impact, and the extra HP really does go a long way sometimes. Oh, and I suppose it's worth noting that the Rockcast also gets a unique walking sound effect to go along with their size. The Rockcast is probably the weakest out of all of the Rangers to actually choose from. Unlike the Hyucast, she doesn't have very many benefits to make up for the lack of attack power compared to the other Rangers. So, her specialty is actually in the defensive stats, which actually don't make a very big impact in this game. Along with having some really high HP like the Rockcast, the Rockcast actually has the highest defensive power in the game, which can make her pretty tanky, but that's really all she has going for her. Her accuracy is also fairly low compared to the rest of the Rangers. It's not as low as the Rockcast itself, but it's still pretty bad. Although, with Ranger accuracy you don't have to worry about missing too terribly much anyways. Overall, the strength of the Ranger class really comes from how strong their rare equipment is. So she's still a good choice overall, it's just a case of pick your preference. If you're a bit of the power gaming type, then try to avoid her as she's a bit weak. But if you just want to pick her, go ahead. Finally, we get to the Forces, which are the magic-based class, and since there's a Mar of every flavor, here's the Fomar. The Fomar is the most balanced in terms of stats when it comes to all the Forces. He has enough attack power to actually be fairly confident with weapons. He also has a decent enough bit of MST to be pretty good with his spells as well. And when it comes to the Forces, they actually get a lot of uniqueness on which spells they actually have a special bonus in, which is decided entirely on their class. The Fomar receives damage boosts to all the mid-range spells, which are Gafoy, Gazond, and Gibarda. He also receives a bonus to the range of Shifta and the Band, and a damage boost to Grants. This gives him a decent mix between attack spells that are boosted and support spells that are boosted. While the guy spells aren't too terribly useful, Gafoy spam can actually be really helpful both in the damage that it applies, and the fact that it'll stun enemies for you. While the Fomar may not be the best at anything, he's certainly the most balanced, so pick him if you just want a character that can do a little bit of everything. Next up is one of my personal favorite classes, the Fomarl. Most of their spell boosts come from the supporting type, as they boosted range to Shifta, Deband, Resta, and Anti. But they also have an even bigger damage boost to grants than the Fomars do. On top of this, their decent defensive power and their level 30 spells actually result in them being surprisingly durable for a Force class. On top of this, they also have a generous amount of ATP, so you can actually switch them over to using weapons instead of spells if you want to. I actually carry around 2 different mags on my Fomar, so I can switch between magic-based and attack-based whenever I want. I would probably rate the Fomar and the Fomar as the 2 most versatile classes in the entire game, so if you're looking for jacks of all trades, they're the 2 that you can go to. Ah, the Phonum, home for some really stupid headgear, and the ability to blow things up like no other. The Phonum supports boosts to both the mid-level attack spells as well as the high-level attack spells, so if you're looking for a character that just blows everything up on screen, then this is the guy for you. While it will take quite a bit of time and effort to get the equipment necessary to keep him from blowing through all of his TP constantly, it's still pretty worthwhile as he's the only force in the game dedicated to just being purely offensive. Finally, there's the poor little Phonin Whirl, who sports being the squishiest class in the entire game, having both the lowest HP and the lowest defensive power. That's not a good mix. She does have some advantages though. She's the only force in the entire game with boosts to the simple level techniques of Foy, Zond, and Barda. These make her really good for single target nuking. Mix this with her having the highest MST in the game, and you'll get the best single target damage you'll ever be looking at, so certain bosses and enemies are actually really good to have a Phonin Whirl around for. She also has boosts to the range of Resta and Anti, so mix this with her really high MST stat, and you get the best medic in the game too. She'll even be able to top off a Rowcast in no time. The reliance she has on single target spells though actually is quite a hindrance, as if you end up fully relying on them for every enemy group, you'll blow through your TP like no other force possibly could, so she does have quite a few shortcomings. Overall, her huge difference in MST compared to the Fomar will still make her spells like Gafoy and Gazan stronger than his would be even with the boost, so she's a very solid choice overall if you're looking for somebody with a bit more of a supportive role than the Phonum, but with still having a lot of the power that he could normally pack. With that, I've gone over character creation, the differences between the races, the importance of section IDs, and the difference between all the various classes in the game. So hopefully this will help you choose exactly which character and ID you actually want, and if hopefully it has taught you a lot about the parts of character creation that are actually critically important when the game wouldn't actually tell you this. While there's still a whole lot to talk about in terms of this game's inner mechanics, next time I think I'm going to go over the online aspect of the game by talking about lobbies and the various things that you can do online only. For now, I hope this video was helpful and informative for you, and I'll see you all next time!